So on Christmas, we started a homily series that we call the Holy Family. On Christmas, we focused on the person of St. Joseph and how men can imitate him as leaders of their families in prayer, protecting their families, and by seeking the inspiration of other holy men. Last week, on the Feast of Mary, Mother of God, we focused on Mary and how women imitate her as contemplative spirits within their families, and what effect that has on themselves and on their families. Today, on the Feast of the Epiphany, as we hear the story of the Magi, we continue this reflection on the Holy Family and focus our attention on the church and how the church is a family. And as we do this, we want to kind of try to understand family life a little better and understand church life a little better as well. We just heard proclaim the story of the Magi. What they do is beautiful. Going to travel to see the Lord, making a rather long journey. It says they came from the east, probably the eastern side of the Arabian Peninsula. So they would have traveled up through what's now Iraq, and then Iran, and then Syria, then down through Lebanon to Jerusalem, and then to Bethlehem. Quite a long journey, something that is not done lightly, a great act of devotion, to go and see someone they don't know. And yet, it's not really an image that the church has used very much to describe herself. There's no other reference in the New Testament to the Magi. Matthew gives the only one. St. Paul doesn't reflect on them, and the other New Testament writers don't reflect back on the example of the Magi. The church fathers do only insofar as it foreshadows the invitation to Gentiles to enter into the church, and foreshadowing the mission to the Gentiles that the apostles were undergo, because unlike the shepherds, unlike the other people who visited Jesus when he was a child, the Magi were Gentiles. But the church hasn't really used their story very much, their image very much, as a sign of the church. And I think it's because of who they were. They were friends, companions, united for a common purpose. But the church, we're not necessarily friends. I mean, you probably have friends here. Hopefully you have friends here. But probably you can't name most of the people in the church today. There may even be people here you don't like or who rub you the wrong way. And that doesn't matter. The church is like a family. In a family, we have those things. And unlike companions on a journey, for the Magi, when they returned home, they probably separated and went their own ways. But family remains united, even when separated by geography. St. Paul uses the image of a family life. And all throughout the New Testament, easily the language of family is the language that is most used to describe the church. We see this in the second reading as St. Paul says, brothers and sisters, as he's writing to the church in Rome. And he reflects on the fact that we are all co-heirs, heirs, like children inheriting something from a father. In this case, inheriting a kingdom of grace, a life of virtue, and the love of God, and even salvation from God the Father. We're a family. And as we think about family, just a couple of images come to mind. And, my own, I'm not thinking primarily of a family just within a house, but more of an extended family, but not even like my own. I have 9 first cousins, 8 on my mom's side, 1 on my dad's side. We're all close enough together in age that at one point we were all either in grade school or high school at the same time, right? So we're pretty close. We all know each other. I had a friend in high school whose dad was one of 11 children, and her mother was one of 13. And then each of her aunts and uncles had at least 10 children. And so she had over 100 first cousins on her mom's side and over 100 on her dad's side. That's a lot of people. I remember I was invited. She invited me one time to go as her family got together, I think maybe for the 4th of July. We got together at her uncle's house, and there were people everywhere and playing volleyball and eating food, and there were little kids everywhere, little kids kind of getting into the food and getting into the dirt and getting into everything, because that's what kids do. And I saw a girl who looked kind of like my friend, and I said, well, who's that? She said, it's my cousin. I know that. What's her name? I don't know her name. She didn't know her cousin. I couldn't imagine not knowing your first cousin's name. She goes, well, there's 3 or 4 new ones every time we get together. I can't keep track of all of them. And you know, a church, and in particular a parish, is much like that. Certainly a parish this size with 3,600 people, there are 3 or 4 new ones every 2 weeks as we celebrate baptisms over and over again. But yet, there they were, and she had this great love for her cousin, and she could have found out who that cousin was by just asking one person. One of the adults would have known who it was and would have known their name. Or I think of a story from my own family life. My sister, the one with the 2 boys, she's 2 years younger than me, which led to some conflicts. And so I was in 8th grade, she was in 6th grade, and at that time, we didn't get along very well. She was kind of little sister tag along, and kind of I tried to avoid acting like I knew her, but one day one of my classmates was kind of picking on her in the hall. So the next day, the custodian found that there was a dent in the locker shaped a lot like the back of a human head, which is not the right way to respond, but she was my sister. Right, and so even though we didn't get along, she was my sister, she was family. Or I think of another experience this past November. My grandmother passed away at 93 years old. I went up to Topeka for the rosary and for the funeral, and as I was leading the rosary, I looked out, and the room was full of about 100 people, all of whom looked pretty much the same because we have pretty strong genes. I think there were only 5 different faces, just at different ages and so on. But then afterwards, it was people I'd never met. My grandmother's cousins, my grandfather's cousins, people I didn't know, at least couldn't remember having met, didn't even know they existed. And yet afterwards, everyone was there and kind of getting to know each other, introducing or reintroducing one another, and just expressing words of consolation and words of love. Kind of a beautiful thing. We didn't need to know everyone's story. We didn't even need to know everyone's name. We just knew that we were family. And that was enough. In family life, whether it be a natural family or a church family, there's a certain level of dedication that we have to one another that goes beyond even friendship. It doesn't even require us to know each other. And those are some examples from my own family life. You can probably think of examples, hopefully, you can think of examples from your own family life, where someone cares for someone else just because they're family. Think of some beautiful examples here that I've seen lately in our parish. This past November, as I was talking about the need to add someone to our staff to be a full-time youth minister and director of religious education or an associate pastor. I've talked with a number of groups within our parish about that. And I was visiting with the Harvest House. Harvest House is parishioners who are 55 and older. And so I was telling them about that. Most of them are much older than 55. But anyway, I was talking with the Harvest House about this, and like every one of them expressed their desire that we as a parish be caring for our young people. And none of them have children or their own sons and daughters who are in our school or who are school age and in our parish. One of the couples has grandkids here, but all of them said that it was important that we be providing for our young people. All of them did. They didn't even know the names of most of our young people. They just knew that they're ours. They're our parish. They're our family, and we need to provide for them. Or a beautiful example, that the Knights of Columbus. We have a number of our high schoolers who are going on the March for Life trip here at the end of January, going out to Washington, D.C. It's this great pro-life protest, hundreds of thousands of people from around the country. The Knights of Columbus know that that's a good thing to do. They know that it's expensive. And so they decided to do something to help our parishioners to be able to do that. And so this morning, they're hosting one of their parish fellowship breakfasts over in Sutter Hall. I invite you to go over after Mass. And it's to help some of our high schoolers to be able to to do that trip, to do that good work. At the beginning, they didn't even know who the students would be. They just knew that they'd be part of our parish family and that they had the ability to help. Likewise with so many of the different things that we do as stewards, we do things not knowing exactly who it's going to benefit, just knowing it's going to benefit our parish family, and that's enough. Whether it be cleaning the church or the girls who put together the blessing kits that we're going to give out at the end of Mass today, or as we tithe, as we make our financial contributions, knowing it's our gifts they're just going to be spread out. They're going to serve the whole family, not just myself or not my own immediate family, but our whole parish family. It's a beautiful thing that we carry out and perform stewardship in that way, caring for one another, even those whose names we don't know. The second thing about family life is that in family life, roles are held generally, not exclusively. So I talked the last couple of weeks about kind of the unique role of men and the unique role of women, but those things, they're not done exclusively. And so while it is more proper to the vocation of a husband and father to be the leader of the family in prayer, that doesn't mean he always has to do it. And likewise, as women are called to have and to share that contemplative spirit with their families, men do it as well. Those things are shared. And we think of other more tangible responsibilities, whether it be providing for a family or cooking dinner. And so often there's one person who takes the lead, but then those jobs are also shared and the rest of the family helps as well. And likewise, in our parish life, there are very few things that have to be done by a specific person. Generally, those would be really just the sacraments that need to be done by a priest or bishop. But even there, so much of the work is shared by other ministers, sacristans and readers and extraordinary ministers of communion, sharing in that work of celebrating the sacrament, celebrating Holy Mass. Or I think of, when a couple comes to me for marriage preparation, most of the work is already done by their own parents and by the other married couples in their lives who have shown them what marriage is supposed to look like, what marriage can look like. All of those works of the church, they may kind of fall primarily or in a great way to one person or to one group of people, but they end up being shared by the whole community. And that leads to the third aspect of family life, and that is that a family has a God-given mission. God has given us each one a mission to love God and to love your neighbor. That's the mission that He's given to each one of us in the two great commandments. And that same mission to love God and love your neighbor is lived out in a special way in family life. In the human family, the two purposes, two parts of the mission of the family is the mutual support of the spouses, so to love one another, to help each other through difficulties, to help each other to grow in holiness, and to one day go to heaven. And then the procreation and the education of children, bringing children into the world and bringing them up to know the Lord, to be filled with faith. It's the mission of the natural family. The mission of the church family, you've heard me talk about before. First, evangelization, to share the faith with others. Secondly, hospitality, to welcome them into the community. Thirdly, faith formation, to allow that faith that they've received as they come to know and to believe in Jesus to shape their lives, to help them to know how to interact and to live in the world. Fourthly, prayer, so relating directly to God, praising Him, asking Him for the things that we need. And finally, service, addressing the needs of one another. This is the mission of our church family. And with both the mission of the natural family and the mission of the church family, of course, we do other things, but hopefully we never allow anything to get in the way of that mission. We keep ourselves focused on it at all times. On this feast of the Epiphany, as we consider how those Magi arrived and saw the Lord, we accept the invitation ourselves to draw near to Him. But we do so in a way different, and I dare say better than the Magi did. because as they went home and went their separate ways, we remain a united family. So we ask God to bless us, to bless each of our families, and to bless this parish family. At the end of Mass, I invite you to take one of our house blessing kits. It's a custom on the Feast of the Epiphany to ask God's blessing for the new year. A blessing upon your home and a blessing upon your family. In just a moment, we'll go and bless those kits, but then invite you at the end of Mass to take one and to use it for your family prayer.